Did I do something wrong? What did I do? I thought I've been loving everybody, treating them good. Here they come. We'll give them just a couple more minutes. We got about 27, so they're getting on. All right, they must don't know me. They know I'm gonna start close to on time. But Bruce, what's up?
Bishop, how you doing?
I'm trying to make it. I already told him for an old man, I'm not bad, but Pastor Rushing rebuked me. He said, you don't know what I'm talking about. And I took it too. I took it. Sister Sue Lacey, what's up?
Hey, I'm loving this cold weather. What about you?
Oh man, don't do that. It was 80 today. I'm sorry.
Yeah, rub it in.
Yeah, I'm in Orlando, but it ain't gonna last long. All right, Katie, if you'll go ahead and start sharing that for me, we'll go get started. We'll let those folks come on. I want Dr. Rachel to have time that she needs to have in order to give us her presentation, at least a reasonable facsimile of her presentation. Thanks, Katie. This is Racial Equity and Social Justice Task Force, February 9th, 2021. Here's the purpose of the task force. We're going to be repetitive because there's a lot of information that's been passed out, a lot of things we've gone over. So we're just trying to do some housekeeping, keep up, make sure that you are getting that information repeated. You all know that I pastor a church and we have a rule at church. And that rule is if you didn't make the announcement 5 times, people probably didn't hear it. So we're being repetitive, not because we want to insult your intelligence, but there's a lot of information. You have busy lives, and we just want to make sure that you're keyed into what's going on. We're trying to create a pro-equity agenda for the city of Akron outlined in a 5-year strategic plan. We're striving to uncover structural and institutionalized racism in our community. The first task is to identify 1 to 3 areas of structural or institutionalized racism in your area of focus. As you work on that, you're probably gonna, some of you, you're working on it and you have 1 or you haven't got 1 yet. Some of you have 3 or 4. So we'll work on that. We are not focusing on corruption. Those things come up periodically. We're not focusing on individual racism or prejudice, but we're working on institutional structural kinds of things. Here's an example of the subcommittee's pro-equity definition. Equity in communication means that every Akronite can access information regarding city government's policies, actions, meetings, and opportunities, and that their race, gender, socioeconomic status, age, or access to technology does not prevent them from obtaining and understanding this information. Opportunities include RFPs, grant announcements, special events, and recreation information. So that's just an example of something that they're working on in the communication subcommittee. I'm going to make sure that you got these major deadlines down. April 1st, we want you to be able to have an identification of an area of concern, narration of the initial research efforts, explain questions asked and how answers were obtained, and then a list of responsive actions. At least you are starting to get that down, and we're going to have the subcommittee chairs and co-chairs report on that in our meeting, which is usually the 3rd Tuesday. July the 1st, a summary of questions, the subcommittee conversation regarding areas of concern, evaluation of established best practices and research as applicable, and policy recommendations. And then by October the 1st, we want to have a summary of the subcommittee conversations regarding areas of concern, identification of resources, informing solutions, conversations, document, guest speakers. And by that time, you ought to at least have some kind of policy recommendation. Our guest speaker this evening is Dr. Rachel Talton. She's the CEO of Synergy Marketing Strategy and Research, Inc. She has authored several practitioner and academic articles, including Dare to Build Trust in Times of Distrust and Trust Pays Off in Distrust Dominated Environments. I really like what I read about her because she uses this name that she's the Chief Transformation Officer of Flourish Leadership LL, and I sometimes refer to myself as the Chief Relational Officer, and in this particular instance, the Chief Officer or Relational Officer of the trust to the city of Akron. So she's accomplished, her accomplishments will take up the rest of our time. So I invite you to learn more about her online. So Dr. Rachel, I'm gonna put it in your hands. Take it away. Thanks for being with us this evening.
Thank you so much for having me, Bishop. I appreciate it. I see a lot of familiar faces. So hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. It is a pleasure to be here. And, the work that you guys are doing is really amazing. I have promised the Bishop that I would be succinct. And so hopefully, let's make sure I am sharing my screen. Okay, so can you guys see my screen, the full screen?
Yes.
Okay. Excellent. So today we're going to talk about, and I see my soror, Tracy Carter, so I'm going to ask Tracy to make sure that you ding me when we are at 30 minutes or 25 or 30 minutes, so we have plenty of time for questions. That said, I like to have conversations, so please, stop me if you have a question. I am happy to answer it. As you've heard from the Bishop, my dissertation has been on trust. Most of the work that I've done, even in marketing and in human resources, has been on helping organizations build trust and leaders build trust. And so now we're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion and trust. And so in talking about doing this, having this conversation with Tamika and the Bishop, really it's about building trust amongst yourselves, and most importantly, building the trust of the constituents who have entrusted you with this amazing task. So today, the first thing that we're going to do is an exercise, and goodness gracious, I hope it works, on Menti. And then we're going to dig into what does it mean to trust someone? What does trustworthiness mean? We're going to talk about the intersection of trust and inclusion. Then we're going to talk about the need for trust in promoting racial equity, why the time is now, and it starts with you. And so again, as I shared with Bishop, I can do, like my shortest speech is 3 hours. So we're going to make sure that we get through this in 30 minutes. So do each of you have a phone with you? I can't see your faces. Hang on a second. Do that. So I can't see your faces. Can someone, does everyone have a phone? I'm sure you're nodding your heads, but I can't see you. Is that a yes?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much. So what I'd like for you to do, if you have your phones with you, is to go to menti.com and use the code that you see there, 8475926. And I want you to think about the character traits that are most important for great leaders to have. What are the character traits when you think about a great leader, someone whom you respect? What are the traits in yourselves that you see? What are those character traits that are most important for great leaders to have? Everybody get in okay? I've actually taken you off of shared screen just so I can see your faces.
While she's doing that, we're waiting. If you wouldn't mind putting your name in the chat, that's the way we'll take attendance to know that you were on. Thanks, appreciate it.
Okay, responses are coming in. We'll reload them one more time. Okay, so can everybody see my screen? Hopefully you can.
Yes.
Vision, integrity, empathy, honesty, compassion, discernment, caring, confidence, trust, passion, humility. All of these are the most important character traits that you guys believe, make a great leader. And I love the fact that integrity is the biggest word on this screen. I'll give you a few more minutes for a couple more to come in. This is very powerful though. Justice, open-mindedness, emotional intelligence, trustworthiness, decisive. Excellent. Excellent. Okay, so interestingly enough, you guys, you hit the nail on the head. What are those traits and characteristics that it takes to be a great leader? What does it mean to trust someone? Is it possible to trust an entire institution, which is what I wrote my dissertation on? What does it mean when people distrust their government or people in their organization, for example? So now we're going to get down to the nitty-gritty of it all. What does it mean to trust? The definition of trust is the willingness to be vulnerable. So when you trust someone, that person can actually hurt you. You trust them to not hurt you. You trust them to have your best interest at heart. Trust is a set of behaviors such as acting in a way that is dependable for other people. So, at the end of the day, the most important element for you to remember that trust is the willingness to be vulnerable. So what does trustworthiness mean, right? This is where it gets into the definitions that you guys gave us earlier: competence, integrity, and benevolence. And this is where many organizations and many individuals, and as Bishop was talking about, the structural issues that face us across Akron and across the world today, really, at the end of the day, a lot of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging issues start with trust. We don't trust the other, and we see each other as other. And so how do we begin to earn trust? How do we begin to make people feel that we are trustworthy? Trust is an attitude that we have toward people, that we believe and hope that they are trustworthy. Trust and trustworthiness are distinct because, again, trust is the willingness to be vulnerable, and trustworthiness, have you earned that trust, is the belief that you are competent, that you have high integrity, and that you are benevolent. And we'll get into that in a second. So we talked about competence, integrity, and benevolence. And I like to tell the story of I'm going to start with benevolence. Each of these are equally as important when it comes to being trustworthy. But I'm going to start with benevolence because when I think about benevolence, I think about my grandmother, who had 19 children. She was married to a sharecropper. She had her first child when she was 16 years old, and she only finished the 8th grade, right? So, but she is one of my favorite people in the world. She passed away when I was 16 years old, and she is an angel that is with me to this day. And one of the reasons is that I always knew that she put my interest, the interest of her children, the interest of her community and her church, before her own. That's benevolence. So as you're leading, as you're doing this work, how are you acting in a way that is benevolent, showing that you are putting the needs of the community, your customers, your employees, your team before yourself? And so that is really important. The second piece that is included in this definition of trustworthiness is integrity. Integrity. And so usually when you think about integrity, you think high moral standards, that person has a high level of quote unquote integrity, that they do what they say they're going to do. But integrity also means shared values, right? So there are people with whom you may not necessarily think that they have the highest moral standard, but if you believe that they have shared values around this particular issue, then you can trust them. Now, I may trust my grandmother to the hilt. I trust her with my life. I would trust her with anything, but I would not trust her to do my taxes or to perform surgery on me. Why? Because she is not competent in those areas. So the last area of trustworthiness is competence. Are you competent to do the task that is laid before you? That is very important as well. And so you can trust someone. Again, I may trust an individual to do surgery on my mom's heart, but I would not necessarily trust that same individual to watch my children, right? And so you can trust people in one way and not necessarily in another. And that's really important as well. So when you think about your relationships and when you think about even this work, are you putting the needs of others before yourself as you do this work? Do you have a high level of integrity and shared values? And if you don't, how can you find those shared values with individuals? And are you competent to do the task? Any questions? I know we're supposed to wait until the end, but does anyone have any questions about those three? I can't see your faces. Okay. So the intersection of trust and inclusion, why does it matter that you're trustworthy as you're doing this work? It is so very important. I work with organizations around the world right now on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And one of the most important elements that we often work on first is how do you help individuals and organizations and leaders build trust? Because at the end of the day, you can put out all the statements you want, you can put out this strategic plan, and if people don't trust you, if they don't believe the words that you're saying, then it's going to fall flat. And people with confirmation bias will kick in, and folks will find, issues to have with the work that you've done, and they will find them. And so it is really important that you are trustworthy as you put out this statement, and as you work together, as you collect your data. Be trustworthy, and then you can begin to work on those issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion. It is so important. And Bishop can tell you this, at the end of the day, that you build trust with the community that you are entrusted to serve. I don't know if you guys have heard of Edelman. Obviously, I do this work for a living, but Edelman does a trust barometer every year, looking at trust in governments, trust in corporations, trust in the news media. And they found that public trust has really, really eroded. It was already bad for government, it was already bad for the media. But it has eroded even since COVID-19 because of, we're living through 3 pandemics right now. At the end of the day, obviously we have COVID, which is a health pandemic. We have the racial pandemic that we're all living through, and we have an economic pandemic that we're dealing with. And so the sort of the convolution of all of those issues has really, really eroded the public trust. And that's one of the reasons that I'm talking to you today about these issues. Obviously, it's important in your daily lives and in your work, but it is really important for this issue for you to talk about how the racial equity in Akron, is really about the people. It is about having shared values, and it is about the competence that you have, the data that you have at the end of the day. I saw this, I did not write this, but it's so very powerful. Diversity is a fact. So we think about the 36 elements of diversity that exist today. So there's obviously the visual diversity, the race and gender. There are things that you can't see, the ways that people think and the ways that they behave, their education. There's LGBTQ. There are all of these ways in which diversity is a fact. You are a woman, or you're transgender, or you're a man, you are Black or white or mixed, you are, it is a fact. Whatever those elements of diversity that you hold within yourself, those are a fact. Equity, choosing to treat people equitably, is a choice. It is not necessarily a fact. And so obviously systemic racism is an issue, or we wouldn't be here having this conversation. And so it is a choice that we choose to treat people equitably, that we choose to find out where they stand on an issue and what additional resources they may need. That is a choice. Inclusion is an action. Every day we need to come to work and show up in our workspaces and think about how we can create a culture that is inclusive. And the same thing is true for the city of Akron. We have to begin to really see one another, really listen to one another, and create an environment where people feel that they belong, and also that their individual values are respected and upheld. And then finally, belonging is an outcome. Belonging is the combination of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And belonging, when people truly feel that they belong and they have that equal access to opportunities that Bishop was talking about, to healthcare, to transportation, to capital, to business opportunities, to education, all of those outcomes, that is when we have truly arrived at belonging. So why now? Why are we having this conversation, at this moment, at this time? Obviously, health disparities being considered a racial issue was obviously George Floyd and those 8 minutes and 46 seconds that changed so many lives. Not that it was new. We've been watching this go on forever, and since George Floyd. But that, I think, was a breaking point for many people and many institutions, many cities, many governments. And so now we are in this moment. We have this moment right now to be those trusted leaders with passion and compassion and all of the words that you put out there for being a trusted leader. If we miss this moment, it would be tragic for us to not take advantage of this moment that we're in. And so I beg you, I really, really beg you to not only do this work and do it well, but do it from a place of trust and a place of integrity and a place of benevolence, in addition to obviously the competence and brilliance that you all have. So the 6 building blocks of trust are critical. And so I feel like I've been talking too much and not listening. So can somebody read these for me?
Dr. Talton, you have 12 minutes.
Oh, I do. Excellent.
Ma'am.
You want
So
us to
Tracy-
read all 6 or just read 2 or 3?
Yeah, just read 2 or 3, just
Okay.
because I want to hear your voices.
All right. Reliability and dependability. A person or group that is true to their word and fulfills their commitments encourages trust.
Mhm.
Transparency. When people share their thoughts, feelings, and considerations, or when an organization tells its members what's going on, everyone knows where they stand and trust can flourish. And number 3, competency. If you think a person, leader, or organization is not capable of doing what they are supposed to do, you cannot trust them.
Number 4, sincerity, authenticity, and congruency. People can often sense when someone says something that is not aligned with what they are feeling inside.
Say it again.
Fairness. Oh, you want to read that 4 again?
No, I'm just thinking, say it again.
No problem. It's call and response. We in church.
Right.
Number 5, fairness. Some people act as if it's the needs and desires of others are not important, or they don't truly listen to or respect both sides.
Mm-hmm. And how important is that in this work, right? We have to listen to all sides. Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
Openness and vulnerability. If a person never says they are wrong and apologizes or acknowledges their mistakes, other people do not feel comfortable disagreeing with them or sharing their own thoughts.
Thank you. And so these 6 building blocks of trust are so important to, again, to the work that you're doing on this task force and the work that you do in your daily lives. Thank you very much for reading. I did it. I can't believe it. Yay. So I'm going to actually stop sharing my screen now so I can see your faces and answer any questions that you have. I can't literally, I don't think I've ever done a presentation that quickly.
Dr. Rachel, that was amazing. I feel like I've been to church. I feel like shouting. because you are talking about a subject that is so critical and I hear so little about it. I've done some teaching on trust, and this is just the most information that I've heard anybody ever put together. And I didn't know anybody could do a doctrinal dissertation on trust, but you are to be commended. Is this information in a book, a presentation? Where can we find your information on trust?
Oh, sure. Actually, my dissertation, and you will literally fall asleep reading it. I have some practitioner articles as well. So I will send you a couple of things that I've written. The most academic work that I've done on trust, though, is my dissertation, which talks about, again, how leaders can build trust and loyalty with their customers and their employees, which, of course, is so important.
Thank you so much.
Does anybody have any questions, thoughts?
Yes, ma'am. Dr. Rachel.
Yes. Hi, Stephen.
Greetings. That number 4 jumped out to me. That sincerity piece, because being sincere, being genuine, and being authentically real takes a lot of courage and a host of other adjectives that really speak to what good leaders encompass and what they give and what they inspire others also to become. But when it's missing, when people aren't being that, but they profess that, and this is true with politicians and others who get into high positions, how do you effectively navigate that space? As you mentioned, you can sense when their video and their audio don't go together.
Mm-hmm.
Right? The audio says all these grand things, but then when you watch the behavior, you notice things. And when it's time to navigate that space, it's a gray area that's very difficult. And trust, in my opinion, hinges right there. What would you suggest, or how do you recommend you effectively navigate that particular space right there?
Yeah, so you want to retreat. I see, my brother, that's a weekend discussion. But so I'm going to answer a question in 3 ways. So one, if that person is your leader and you see that they are being insincere, right? So this person is, let's just say, the president of the United States, right? Or some other leader who is over you. So you may not be able to necessarily change their behavior. What you can do, all each of us can do, is model the right behaviors that we want to see in that individual. So if that person is over you, my suggestion is twofold. First, model the behavior. Communicate in ways that they can see that maybe their values are over here, your values are over here, and stand in your values. Show up in a way that shows that person how to behave. The second thing that I would say is to be brave. Have a conversation with that individual and say, I think you're a great leader. I think you're a wonderful individual. Here's some feedback that I think could be really helpful to you, in some things that I've seen that you've done. Now, you may be scared to death and be shaking as you do that, but you may leave that meeting with more respect than you walked in with, right? And so I suggest that is also an option. And then the third way that I would answer that question, and that's talking about the people who would follow you, right? What is leadership? Which is, a whole nother retreat. But I define leadership as follows. Number 1, you must have and communicate a clear and compelling vision so that people know exactly where you're going and they choose to follow you, right? Have and communicate a clear and compelling vision. The second thing you have to do is give them the tools and resources that they need to be successful in achieving that vision, right? So if I tell you, Stephen, we're going to California, we're going to sit on the beach, we're going to have martinis, and this is going to be a great time. And then the tools and resources I give you are a map to get to Florida, then I have not given you the tools and resources you need to meet my vision, right? And so that's the second piece. And then the third piece is holding that person accountable. And so why did I share that with you? Why did I share that leadership piece with you? Whoever you might be in charge of, and Bishop talked about how he is the chief relationship officer. He is the head of his church, and the people at his church choose to follow him. So, I talked about, you've got this leader that's inauthentic, and you've modeled behavior for him, you've had a conversation with him, and then there are the people who would follow you. You need to model authentic behavior for them. Even if this person chooses to remain inauthentic, you now need to take on the leadership role and be authentic for those people who would follow you. So you're almost the moderator, the mediator between that person and the team that you have been in charged with, and that's the way that I see it, that you are charged with leading. So that's the way that I would handle that situation.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Dr.
anybody
Toll,
else?
I'm Sue Lacey, and I
Sue.
really very much appreciate your thoughts tonight. I'm wondering what your recommendation is for situations where trust has been broken and it needs to be reestablished.
Yeah. So I have a paper on that too, and it literally. I'm a recovered banker. Many folks don't know that, but I worked with National City for 10 years, and I wrote a paper on trust repair in the banking world, as you can imagine, when we in banking had destroyed the trust of our consumers, and really, we were the foundation of the economic breakdown in 2007, 2008. So the first thing that you have to do when you break someone's trust, whether that person is your husband or partner, or whether that person is a professional colleague, is to be transparent. That is the first thing that you must do, is to own up to what you've done and take responsibility for it. You're talking about trust repair now, right? And so at the end of the day, if you know that you have broken the trust of someone or that you have trust to repair, you must first be transparent and say, I screwed up, pardon my French, and here's what I plan to do about it. So that's number 2. I'm sorry, I screwed up, and here's what I plan to do about it. And so this is the way that I really sort of lay it out for people. Put together 2 or 3 things, short-term, mid-term, and long-term, that you are going to do to repair that trust that you have violated, and do those things. Right. And so, I never go back to someone whose trust I need to repair. And we all do. Everyone makes mistakes. We all do. And so at the end of the day, it's not really that you made a mistake. It's, do you take responsibility for it and then do the things that are required in order to earn that trust back? So again, apologize, be transparent, put together a short, medium, and long term, the things that you're going to do over the short term, midterm, and long term, and then do those things. And don't stop following up. Don't just say, okay, I apologized, everything is cool, and then go back to your old behavior. So trust repair is about, again, once a mirror is broken, you can glue over it, you can, sand it down, you can try to fix it, but there'll always be that break. And so in order to really repair that break, you have to continuously follow up.
So just a follow-up
Sure.
question, that's very helpful. If you're a leader of an institution who screwed up, but you weren't at the helm of the institution when the screw up happened, what's your recommendation?
My recommendation doesn't really change that much, quite frankly, Sue. So literally, I was at National City. You guys all remember Peter Raskin and that whole sort of all that stuff that went on. The new CEO came in and he had to do the same things because he is a leader. Remember, I said you have to have a clear and compelling vision. You have to give those who would follow you the tools and resources they need to be successful, and then hold folks accountable. If you come into that role knowing that there's trust to be repaired, then you pretty much have that same job. You have to say, you can't just be like, oh, Joe did it. It's not my fault. I get a brand new start. People are going to be looking to you to truly lead. So at the end of the day, if you're the new leader, then you have to say, here are the ways in which, this organization has fallen below the level of integrity that I would expect. Don't even blame it on the other person, because it's not their fault at this point. It's you. You're in the job now. They're looking at Sue, right? And so you say, here are the ways in which this organization is not living up to the values that I hold dear. And here's what make a list. Here's what in the short term, medium term, and long term, I plan to do about it. Now that's leadership.
Right on. Love it. Thank you.
You're welcome. Tracy, you don't have any questions for me? Robert? Mark Crone, where are you?
Dr. Talton, I appreciate the presentation tonight. I want you to talk about the occasions when it's perfectly okay for you to walk away. You've exhausted all the tactics you just outlined. Talk about having the courage to do that step.
Yep, you do want to retreat. And it really is about courage, right? I mean, at the end of the day, sometimes it's about courage. I'm a small business owner, and it is so difficult. Robert, you know this, so difficult for us to walk away from business, especially in the middle of a pandemic. But there are companies and organizations I will not work with. And it doesn't matter if I have to get on food stamps. I won't work with them because they don't have values that are aligned with mine. And so at the end of the day, you have to look at your own values. Remember, I talked about integrity? That's about shared values. It's not necessarily always good. It's about shared values. And if you can't find that kind of alignment with an organization, an institution, or an individual, right? I mean, sometimes we have to walk away from people in our lives as well, right? And so this is, the words that I'm saying to you are true for institutions, but they are also true for individual relationships as well. And so what I would say to you is that if you have tried to do all of the things that I've said, you've tried to stand up for what is right, you've tried to communicate respectfully with your leaders, you've tried to share your leadership skills with the team that would follow you, and none of that is working, and you realize that your values are not aligned, then it is about courage. I would say put on your big girl pants and walk away. And even if it's painful, even if it hurts, even if it's scary, the right thing to do is to walk away.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Anybody else? Mark Crone, I'm not looking at you, but I'm looking at you.
Hey, Rachel, it's Mark. How are you?
Hi.
Thanks for everything you've done here. I guess, I heard your last statement, and, I'm sure you've served on a number of task force like we're involved in tonight. I mean, what do you see as the greatest barriers to achievement in a group or a session like this?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question, because I'm just now meeting this group, because every group has its own DNA, right? I know Tracy personally, love her. She's my sorority sister, but I don't know her in the context of this particular group of people. So I'd have to spend a little bit more time with you to talk about specifically how you, what some of the barriers are for this group. What I can share with you is in general, what are some of the barriers to success that I see on task forces, particularly around diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging issues, are a couple-fold. Number one, You may have individuals, obviously there is a diversity in this group. You have people with different thoughts about diversity, equity, and inclusion. So one of the first things that I would do in a group like this is to do some sort of assessment to kind of understand where people are, so that we know that we're, everybody doesn't need to be on the same page, but to really understand where people's differences are helps you to, to come together better. Diversity is a wonderful thing. As a matter of fact, it is won a Nobel Peace Prize, quite frankly. Diversity prediction theorem won a Nobel Peace Prize. So the idea that you guys are all different and you're coming together is a good thing. However, understanding what those differences are makes it better, right? So that you know that Kevin may have an idea and Teresa's ideas are very, very different. And so you can bring both of those ideas to bear if you know what they are and you can say them out loud. That's one thing. So the diversity of you all is a good thing, but it should be managed. And really, in order to bring the best out of this group, having those facts is really important. The second thing is assuming that you guys understand the diversity that you have, you all respect each other's thoughts and ideas and vision for where you want to take Akron around diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging. Your ideas about what success looks like is also different. And so each of you, again, has different ideas about what success looks like and how to get there. So understanding what those are and how to close the gaps in this group is very important, particularly as you communicate that out to the community. And then, so that's just in this group. That's just talking about, the DNA of you as a group of people. Now you've got to communicate something out into the public. Now you've got to bring on and engage a public in this, in whatever it is that you guys put forward in your strategic plan, and have them come along with you. So how do you communicate that in a way that makes people want to engage you, makes people want to be a part of this, believes, because we've been here before. All of us and each of you know it. We've been here before, we've had this conversation before. So what makes this time different? Right. And so I would focus on that and really, really communicate. We've been here before, we know it, and here's how this time is going to be different. And then finally, take it with a grain of salt, but I'm going to go back to trust. How well do you trust each other? And how well does the community trust you? Are you acting in ways that are competent, that are shared values, that integrity piece, and that show that you have benevolence, that you are willing to put the needs of the community before yourselves? And so those are some of the barriers to success that I see.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Let's have at least one more question.
Okay, Teresa.
Hi, Rachel.
Hello.
You need to stop calling people out.
I was going to say Robert, but
okay, I'm on mute. Go ahead, Robert. As I look at sort of what the topic of your presentation was, the powerful intersection of trust and inclusion to promote social justice. I mean, the task of this committee, and I mean this task force as well as all of the subcommittees, is huge. And I think it's probably larger than any of the other millions of DEI task force we all sit on.
Right.
Because when you start using words like, sort of dismantling systemic, racism, and how do you sort of change these systems that have been put in place, I think the reality is, for not only the people on this call, but for the entire community, is that over the last 4 years, but certainly over the last year, people have been introduced to new biases. And I would probably say those biases are held by people of color. Because we now find ourselves in a situation where we've seen some behaviors and we have seen some things surface that, even though we know racism has been around a long time, these weren't things we were dealing with day to day. And so now, as a people, you almost sit with one eye open and one eye closed, looking side eye, because you feel like there's sort of some trust, some betrayal of trust. You don't know who to trust. You don't know who's telling the truth and who's not. And that affects a lot of what we need to do, because it's hard to go through certain things without your mental health being affected by it. I mean, because we're not machines, we're all human beings. And so I just find it, we had a meeting this morning, actually, Robert's committee through the chamber, the Equity and Inclusion Committee, and a lot of those things came up and were sort of talked about on a larger scale with, corporations and leadership and, how do you change? And my word I always add in is, how do you sustain change?
That's right.
Because we've had a, baby step forward and then 5 steps back, and, it just seems this back and forth, and we just talk a lot. But getting that sustained systemic change is very, very difficult. So what would your thoughts be when you look at a group like this and say, here's the top 3 things that you guys are going to have to do to even begin to touch systemic change? Does it have to be on that big level, to get leaders in large companies and companies in general to buy into that change? Because I just think that there's a lot of new biases that have been introduced or elevated that weren't around before. And it's something that people are afraid to admit and are afraid to talk about, because it makes people uncomfortable. So that's just sort of my observation.
Well, thank you for that. And again, we need a retreat. That was a big question, but at the end of the day, you said, what are the 3 things that I would recommend that you do? And then I'm going to pick on Jim Mullen before we, yes, I did call you out, before we end. The first thing is that you guys need to remember, sort of the suggestions that I gave you. Get together, sort of be on the same page. You guys have to have that shared vision, those shared values that we talked about. And I know that that's not easy. It is not easy, but that's the first thing that I would say. The second is that it needs to be intentional. So you talked about sustaining the change of transforming systemic racism. Even saying that is hard, right? Much less doing it. It is literally a Herculean task. And so we've got to take baby steps so that people can see that we're honest and that we are being honest when we say that we're looking to make change. And so you have to do that from the top down, as you talked about with big corporations and big dollars, et cetera, but also from the bottom up. It can't just be from the top down. It also has to come from the bottom up. So engage the community. Don't forget about, the people that you're here to serve. That is really important. And sometimes we forget that, I think. And then finally, and this may seem, pedantic or small, but what is your intentionality? Why are you here? Don't forget why you're here. Why were you chosen for this task? Why are you here on this call? Why has God placed this task on you? And don't forget that. I wake up every day, and I share this with you, Teresa, but I'll share it with everyone else. Since those 8 minutes and 46 seconds, I wake up every day, and it gets old and it gets tiring, but I wake up every day and I say to myself, how can I eradicate systemic racism today? And so that's the third thing that I would say. Don't forget why you're here. This has to be your God job. And so, and so that's what I would share with each of you in tackling this task. It is not going to happen overnight. Change of any kind takes 13 months. That's what the literature tells us. So anybody that's telling you you can lose weight in 21 days or do this in 3 months, no change, and you can quote me on this, can happen in less than 11 to 13 months. And so no matter what you're doing, let people know that we've got to be in this for the long haul. Thank you for the question.
Thank you.
Okay, Jim.
Hi, Rachel. Thank you. I think you hit a word that I think is really important to this work, and I think it piggybacks a little bit off of Teresa's thought, which is the intentionality. And I think oftentimes a lot of us on this call are in different meetings on different things. But what is your advice to ensure that the work of this task force goes beyond this task force and with some level of intentionality into the other spaces that we champion for and are in on a routine and regular basis? How do we become those advocates for that systematic change that you're talking about?
Yeah, I would go back to, thank you, Jim, for the question. I would go back to the last thing that I said, making sure that each and every day that this is your work. Why are you doing this? And don't forget that. I mean, it's so easy for us to get caught up in the look of things or the sound of things and forget the pure essence of why we're doing this. Lives are at stake, and our job, our God job, is to make those lives better. And so at the end of the day, that's what I would suggest, no matter what room you're in. How can I do the work of making the lives of you right now? For me, it's you, each one of you. How can I make the lives of each one of you better? And so, no matter what meeting you're in, no matter what, small or large task you are entrusted with, go in there and know that this work is really, really important, that you are changing lives, either using your privilege for good or not, and be about it. And then remind yourself again tomorrow morning. Again, it's not easy. It's not easy to do this.
Dr. Rachel, thank you so much. You have shared some incredible information and perspectives tonight. You probably don't know this, but I started the task force with talking about trustworthiness, asking for trust, setting a covenant for communication, attempting to model what trustworthiness looks like so that we would be able to work together as a group, trust one another, and then rebuild trust from the government to the community. So I think you just hit that nail on the head so hard. I think you drove it right on through the board. So what I need you to do is make sure I get this information from you, because I'm an avid reader and I want to use it. You are the first person that in all of my reading, I read about 50 to 100 books a year. And you're the first person that I've read that has talked about trust to any degree. I'm the only other person I know who even preaches about trust to any degree. We mention it, but we don't have any characteristics. We don't have anything. It's just kind of, we need to learn how to trust one another. Well, how do we do that? Right. So you have, your teaching has been incredible. I will get back in touch with you because I think I can use you in a whole lot of other spaces. So, and are you, you're the Chief Transformation Officer. Are you a preacher also? Because you keep on, okay, we'll talk about that offline.
No, I am not. I am not. But this is my God job, and my soror knows that. This is really my God job. So, right. I'm not a preacher. I definitely am not. But
well, I don't know if you're not, or if you want or not, but you're not acknowledging. So, somebody wants to know, can they get this presentation you just did?
Yes. Okay. I usually say no, but I will say yes, because You're asked. Oh, thank you. Yes, I will. I'll send out the presentation. I really appreciate each and every one of you so very much for doing this work, for doing what you're called to do. And again, I would just ask you to each remember why you're doing this. Remember who you are and whose you are every single day. And I thank you so much for your attention to this important topic.
Thank you for your time and your prophetic insight. You hit a lot of things tonight, so thank you. Don't forget, next Tuesday we'll have a chair and co-chair committee meeting. Start trying to help us really hone in on some of the things we talked about earlier. All of you, I appreciate your work. Have a great evening. I'll be talking to any number of you. And she's going to send us some of this information because I'm going to read it up and eat it up. So thanks a lot. Have a great evening, everybody.
Thank you very much.